For today, we are going to be talking about leasing, and in particular, how can you lease your property much faster? And so my name is Lawrence. I'm one of the co-founders of KeyOpp, and I'd like to introduce you to our guest that's going to be speaking, Nathan.
Hey everyone, glad to be here.
Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself, Nathan?
Yes, definitely. So my name is Nathan. I'm the director of sales and marketing at KeyOpp. I actually was a leasing manager for the company for about 3.5 years prior to switching to this new position. And we managed hundreds of lease ups and worked with countless clients to achieve their leasing goals. Our leasing team does everything from like handing move outs, project management for turnkey and renovations. We do showing screenings and lease draftings and resident onboardings as well.
You said hundreds of leases. Is that right?
The entire leasing process, yeah. So I think when I took a look at the metrics about 3 or 4 months ago, it's north of 300 lease ups that we've done
Wow,
since I started with the company.
that's
Yeah.
that's not a small number. So I'm sure you've seen a lot in that time. So Um, I got two questions for you. The first
Yes.
is, what is that QR code in the top right-hand corner of the screen, right above you? And the second question is, given your breadth of experience doing hundreds and hundreds of leasings, what are some of the challenges that landlords and property owners face out there?
Yeah, definitely. So first up, the QR code here is a really special QR code. So this is our gift to you guys, the attendees, for joining this webinar. But basically, if you scan that QR code, you're able to receive one of our free guides, and it is the 10 mistakes landlords make. And it's specialized in San Francisco. So it's a really good guide to read through, and it's free. I think it's about like 10 pages or so. So really some really good nuggets in there for you guys. So feel free to scan that QR code, and then you can go ahead and download the free guide that we prepared for you. So your second question is, I believe it's what are some of the challenges landlords may face while they're trying to rent out the property on their own. So there's a number of things that landlords can face, right? So they might not be able to like host showings every day. And the number one complaint that I hear all the time is about the capacity to handle calls and inquiries 24/7. Uh, our leasing team, what we do with calls is that we actually get calls all the time. We get calls in the evening, in the morning, during work hours, and there's a bunch of people that want to see properties. So we handle all of that for our clients. But that's like the number one. That's the number one complaint that I hear from landlords all the time that are renting out their own properties. But another thing too is just not really knowing how to price rental units. The market analysis that we do is very meticulous. We take a look at the manual comps, like the current comps, and then we also take a look at previous historical data in order to really analyze what the correct or the best rental market price would be in order to get your property leased up faster. So it does take a lot of skill and expertise in order to really price your unit well, because what could happen is that if you price it wrong or too high, then you're going to have your property sitting on the market for a while, and that doesn't look good optically, like to the public, right? People are going to be wondering why is the property on the market for a long time, or if you price it too low, then you're not achieving your maximum income potential for that property. um yeah, so there's a bunch of things too that might be a challenge. What leases to use, what addendums to use in order to maximize protections for the owners, not knowing how to screen applicants to reduce risk and liability, and then fair housing is a big one too. So sometimes there's what do you call those people, that people that just do like
Oh,
test
those
calls?
testers, right? Yeah.
Testers, yeah. So they call sometimes and they ask you questions in order to trip you into answering the incorrect question, or maybe violating fair housing uh, regulations, right? So just be wary of fair housing and be wary of those test callers. But there's definitely a number of challenges that landlords face, especially if you're starting out in trying to rent your property for the first time.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the vast majority of people that self-manage and own properties They don't know that there are testers out there, and there are people that are hired by Fair Housing Administration to call and just check to see if you're willing to accept Section 8, because obviously source of income is a protected class, right? Or
Yeah.
they'll browse the website of listing platforms out there like Craigslist just to see, do you have anything in there that shows that you might be discriminating? So um,
Yeah.
be careful out there for sure. Now, you said a lot of challenges, and that's a lot. There's a lot of stuff that you talked about. So let's roll things back a little bit. Let's start from the beginning. So,
Sure.
what should a landlord and property manager, or self-managing, I should say, a landlord that's self-managing, what should their goals be as soon as they know that somebody's going to be moving out and they need to start thinking about, okay, what do I need to do? What are the top goals that they should have in mind?
Yeah, so there's a number of goals that landlords may have, and we take our time in initially when there is an upcoming vacancy, we take our time in sitting down with the landlord and going over what their goals are, because everyone's different. You might have goals in compressing the vacancy time, right? Just lining up a tenant right after the current tenant moves out, so that way you don't have any loss in rent, or it might be finding the best tenant or getting the highest price possible. So based on these goals, we'll be able to craft up a different strategy. And you should do the same for yourself, right? Take it a step back, analyze everything that you want as your leasing goals, and then create like a plan. If it's compressing vacancy time, maybe working with the tenant to host tours during their tenancy, marketing the unit right after they give notice, and then pricing the unit competitively to increase demand. Or if it's finding the best tenant, maybe they want to make sure that their qualification and screening criteria are transparent on the advertisements, and then it meets their needs, and the landlords spend additional time getting to know the resident via Zoom calls, additional phone conversations, making sure that you're very comfortable with moving in that tenant. If it's getting the highest price, it's just making those updates to your unit, doing like the turnkey minor renovations, and we can touch base on that a little bit later on some like really good ideas on how to do these renovations in order to maximize your income potential.
Okay. Well, we'll talk about that a little bit later, but what are some other things that a landlord can do to try to maximize some of the things that you're describing? For example, you talked about um, move outs, specifically move out notices, early move outs, things like that. Uh, what are some of the secrets that a lot of property management companies out there have?
So move out notices. So I'm assuming you're talking about like when a tenant, what should the landlord do when a tenant submits a move out notice, right? In order to
Well,
turn the property
yeah.
over.
So
Yeah,
when
yeah.
we're
Uh,
Yeah, when we're talking about maximizing and looking at the rent-ready preparation, so to speak, right? Um, trying to uh, trying to maximize some things you talked about, right? How do you compress the vacancy rate? How do you make sure that when when the property is finally vacant, that you're able to quickly turn it over in a minimal amount of time, obviously to compress vacancy rate and things like that. But what are some of those secret sauces that some property management companies have out there?
yeah, definitely. So secret sauces, I think it starts with having a really good relationship with your tenant, right? Because if you have a good relationship with your tenant, you're able to, work with them in order to host showings, do inspections in advance, and do all these things in order to get the property ready ahead of time, prior to their move out, or right after they move out, basically. So some of the things that we do on our end is what we call a pre-move out inspection. So pre-move out inspection is a right that a tenant has in order to request that prior to the official move out inspection. So official move out inspections when you go in, and then after the tenant leaves, and you do like a checklist of things that need to be repaired to in order to take it out of the security deposit if there are damages. But what a pre-move out inspection does is that you go in prior to them moving out, and then you meet with the tenant in order to take a look at and mark down all the things that could be a potential security deposit deduction. So that way it gives the tenant some time in order to, do the repairs or do the cleaning that's needed in order for them to maximize their security deposit return. So it's a win-win scenario or situation for the tenant and the property manager or the owner, because that way, we talked about the tenant benefits, but also on the property management side or the owner side, it gives you insight on what the property looks like and the action items that you need to do in order to line up, all the repairs that you need after the tenant moves out. So, if it needs painting, then you can get, maybe 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks before the tenant moves out, you can schedule vendors to go out, right? If it needs plumbing services, or, if you need some to remodel a certain part of the unit, then you can line that up right away the first week and not waste any time, because to be honest, every day that the property is vacant is money that you're losing. So in order to, reduce that time as much as possible, you want to be able to line everything up right after the tenant leaves. And that's why I bring it back to having like a really good relationship with the tenant, because if you do that, then, you're able to connect with them and then facilitate all those things and for preparation when they move out.
I know.
Another thing too is that another thing too is that sometimes tenants are moving out early, and that's part of the conversations you can have with the tenant, right? Is that sometimes they have to, let's say for example, they submit an application for another property, and with San Francisco, it's very competitive. A lot of times people have to move in, within a week or 2 weeks in order to secure that spot. So a lot of times what residents will do is that they'll move completely right before the lease end date. And you want to be able to have that conversation, because if they do, you can request for them to, for you to do a move out inspection with them earlier. So that way you can give back their security deposit earlier. And that should help you compress that vacancy time if you're able to line everything up.
Well, that's great. All great tidbits of information. Now,
Mhm.
I think you mentioned um, definitely expediting and effectuating a faster turnkey, knowing what the condition is and seeing if the resident's willing to do the repairs themselves, or even scheduling for vendors to uh, get there as soon as they move out to start working on it. That way the property doesn't stay vacant too long, because, you know, $3,000 a month, not saying that's the average rent, but at $3,000 a month, that's $100 a day. So every day
Exactly.
is quite a bit of money.
Yeah.
Now, there's when you look at the what we were talking about with tenants moving out and when they move out, is there um, advantages of having a longer notice? Are there advantages of ensuring that um, anniversary dates are um, at better times of the year versus less ideal times of the year? Or maybe that's a question as well, right? What are
Yeah.
the best times to lease a property? I'm sure that there are better times in the year than others.
Yeah. So what we do is we do require tenants to give a 60-day notice.
Not at
Um,
30?
Not a 30. So 30 is the standard, but we require them to do a 60-day notice in their lease agreements. But what we do is we actually have a yearly lease, instead of doing a year lease and then month to month after, which is, what a lot of landlords do. But when you have a yearly lease, it gives you some more control in when the lease term ends. So that way you can expect, when, you need to do work in order to get the property rented. Um, and it just gives you, some more flexibility in that case. Versus if you have a month to month, what could happen is that the tenant can submit a 30-day notice, right in December, right? Or Thanksgiving time, which to your point is not an ideal time to move out, because the rental market is very slow. Nobody wants to move during the holidays. There's lower inventory, and it might take you like, a couple months in order to get your property rented
Yeah.
out. And you're going to be able to, you're not going to be able to get the highest rent possible. And, it's especially for rent controlled properties as well. It's a huge problem. So what I suggest trying to do is, right, if you find yourself having a tenant moving out if you're on a month to month right now, you can't really change that because that's basically in the original lease agreement that you agreed with the tenant. But let's say if you find yourself having a move out during those slow seasons, right? And I want to just inform everybody that the prime season for the rental market is around like spring to summertime, right? So with that being said, if you find yourself having a move out during the holiday season, slow season, um, I would recommend trying to negotiate a longer term lease with future residents that move in. So when you put your property on the market, and let's say a month later, you find a tenant, sorry, you're able to find a tenant that can move in like within a month or something, then you want to be able to do maybe like an 18-month lease, right? So that way it puts you in a better position when they move out. Because a lot of times there's a lot of turnover with residents, especially in San Francisco, and then especially with higher rent properties. And we see about maybe like every year, about every 1 or 2 years, we'll have like a turnover. So, with that being said, if you do an 18-month lease, then it puts you in a better position than if you were to do a yearly lease and then the tenants move out. And if it depends, like if you have a competitive price point, if you have a really good location, you're gonna have a lot of people flocking in and trying to get the property at whatever cost, even if it means, living in the place for 18 months versus 12 months.
Well, that makes perfect sense. I would personally would rather try to lease up a property during April than during December. So I think the
Exactly.
takeaway, you don't have to have a 1 year lease, right? When you lease it up, especially if you're leasing during the winter, you can
Mhm.
certainly have a 14, 15, 16, 17, 18-month lease. Really up to you,
Yeah.
but just make sure that when the lease term ends, you're going to be able to um, have it end during a ideal season, like you were saying, the spring or sometimes even the fall. Fall seems to be a good time as well. The weather's nice, especially Indian summer in San Francisco. Now,
Yeah.
you brought 60-day notices versus the traditional 30-day. I mean, why does KeyOpp do that? That's kind of excessive, isn't it?
Yeah, so we do that and we put it in the lease term and then sorry, the lease agreement, and also we make it available on our marketing as well. So there's actually three different places that we put it in. So marketing, right? Being transparent in your advertisement for the unit,
Mhm.
putting that in the lease agreement as well as all the follow-up emails that you have with the applicant or the prospective renter. And the reason why we do that is for us to be able to give ourselves ample time in order to market the property and try
Ah,
to find replacement tenants. And during that time, and a lot of the landlords know this, but one of the few rights a landlord has, in California and San Francisco is the right to entry to show a prospective tenant, sorry, prospective renter the property, given of course the standard 24-hour notice. But you during that 60-day notice period, you're able to put the property on the market, do showings, and find a replacement tenant, and that really helps with reducing the vacancy time. And we have a handful, countless properties that we're able to line up tenants, within 3 or 5 days after the resident leaves. And those are in our reviews as well. The owners are very happy with that because they don't have to worry about the loss in rent, which is usually what happens is that when a tenant moves out, you do like the move out inspection, you do all the repairs and everything, and then that could take a couple of weeks before it's ready to be put on the market. Once you put it on the market, you have to do showings, and then usually when and it depends on the property, on the competitiveness of the property, but after it's been put on the market, you do showings. Oftentimes, when you have an applicant and a prospective renter wanting to rent the place, then they can't move in until 30 days later, anyways, right? So because they have to give a 30-day notice, and that's that's not going to be the same for highly valuable competitive properties, like I mentioned before. But that's going to put you in about like a month or a month and a half, right, of lost rental income. So that's why it's so important for us to have that 60-day notice. So that way it gives us, effectively 2 months in order to market the property and then find replacement tenants, which we've been very, very successful with.
uh, wow, that's pretty enlightening. So let me try and piece it together. So by requiring a 60-day notice, you actually have 60 full days, not just 30 days, to market the property the entire time and show it at the same time and be able
Exactly.
to try to get somebody to sign a lease before even the current resident moves out. That's pretty
Yeah,
amazing. Um,
yeah.
well,
And like I said too, that's why you have to have a really good, relationship with your tenant as much as possible. Because when you are giving those 24-hour notices in order to show the place, what we like to do, what we find is best practice is communicate with the tenant and be accommodating, right? Because I don't want someone to show up at my place, like 5 days a week, hosting tours whenever. What we do is we work with the tenant in order to give, 2 or 3 days out of the week where they're okay with showings with, 1 hour time blocks. And we schedule everything during those time blocks. So that way they know when to expect us, and when to get the place cleaned up. And it's better when you communicate and then you accommodate with the resident. So that way you can just facilitate the showing process a lot easier.
I think you probably have some tips and tricks on that as well. Um,
Yeah.
why don't we why don't we dive a little bit deeper into that, right?
Mhm.
How do you maximize the ability to show the property since you have such a wide window, right? 60
Mhm.
days. Um, what are some of the best practices that you employ and the ability for you to maximize the number of showings during that time so that you are able to find somebody that submits an application and wants to move in right away, or at least as soon as the property is vacant?
Yeah, so having those set times out of the week, right? Like I mentioned, it's really going to help, and then you're able to line up all the tours during those set days. Some of the challenges that I've experienced in the past with doing these showings during occupancy is that sometimes the tenants don't clean their place, and
Oh,
it's very
no.
messy, or there's like something that is not conducive to a good showing experience, right? Because if you're showing someone a property and it's just, there's something wrong with it, the place looks dirty, there's a barking dog, it's just not conducive to a good experience. Like they're most likely not going to move forward with the property. So you want to be able to control that as much as possible. Now, when we're talking about like, a dirty apartment, right? We can't really force the residents to clean up. That's not within our landlord rights. But what we can do is try to influence them to clean up. What we've done in the past was, we've offered them like $100 to $200 gift cards if they're able to keep the place clean during showings until the end of their lease. And when you take a look at it in perspective, if you have like a rental that's about like $4,000, that's about like $133 per day for banker's month, right? So usually renters have to give like a 30-day notice, which already puts you back $4,000 per year on rent loss. So if you're able to line a renter within 5 days after the last renter moves out, you save about $3,300 in lost rent for the year. So it's I think it's a really
So
good perspective to
100,
have.
oh yeah, so 100 and $200 is just a drop in the bucket at the end of the day,
Exactly,
right?
right.
Okay.
And
Makes
that's
sense.
why, like, yeah, if you offer that incentive, then they're going to be a bit more willing to cooperate with you and clean the place a little bit better, so that way you're able to find tenants faster.
I think that's the same tactic that the sales team employs as well, right? If they're hosting an open house and it's a tenant occupied property, they'll actually offer a free lunch so that the tenants don't have to be there when they're doing showings and they get a free lunch out of it. And, um, th- you end up having showings that are a lot smoother and
Mhm.
the environment just feels a lot better when you don't have somebody that's looking at you walking around their property. So great
Yeah,
idea.
yeah. Hmm.
Now, obviously, doesn't matter if you have a great relationship with the resident, and it doesn't matter if you're you're able to get the property on the market really fast if you don't have a right price point, right? So I
Yeah.
imagine that pricing a property is going to be hugely important. Price it as you mentioned earlier, you price it too high, you're not going to have any eyes on it. If you price it too low, you're going to lose out on a potential for a higher rent. So, what
Mhm.
is that special um, art that you guys have in being able to find exactly the right price point to have a property at?
Yeah, this one's a little bit more difficult to achieve because it really takes experience, right? And in order, like knowledge and experience about the rental market and the trends it has in order to really be able to put a correct price point on a rental unit. But what we've done is, of course, like we do like a current market analysis on everything that's listed on multiple listing platforms such as like Zillow, Craigslist, Zumper, Trulia, all those platforms. So we take a look at the various different comps. They have to be like similar square footage and have the same amenities. What you want to take a look at is, what is included in rent. A lot of times landlords don't include water and garbage, but some do. And that's about $100, $200 price point. Sometimes they include parking as well. So you want to take all those things into account, all the amenities in order to really be able to put a good price point on there. So yeah, just I would spend a lot of time doing that. And we spent a really good amount of time going over the market analysis because what really matters is first impressions, right? And first impressions, you're going to be able to get that the first week of a listing being active. If you price it too high or you don't have the correct marketing materials or it's just not a good listing, you're going to have a very poor listing experience the first week. And first impressions are everything because if you don't have a lot of interest, when, for example, if you ever been on the rental market, looking for properties on Zillow, a lot of these apps, they'll have a notification or push notification when a new listing is active, right? So that's going to be the case with a lot of the platforms. And you want to garner the hype for the property the first week. And that has to do with, having the right marketing content and then also getting the right price point for the property. If you price it too high, then it's gonna stay on the stay on the platform or the market for a very long time. And a lot of times people take a look at how long the property has been on the market,
Oh,
and
yeah.
a lot of people base their decisions off that. I've got questions all the time, right? Why has the property been on the market for 2 weeks? People really do take a look at that. So you have to price your property right, and then of course, like if it's too low, you're gonna get a lot of people that are responding to you, a lot of inquiries, but maybe you're missing out on $500 of the rent income that you could have had, right? Um, One strategy that I've seen some landlords do is they price it a little bit lower than market rate, like maybe around 10% or so, and they're able to get a lot of interest from renters, but they're able to also control that competition as well by perhaps, for example, offering it to someone that can move in the soonest. And of course, you want to be able to be transparent in your marketing for how you choose applicants, right? That's a very huge thing that you have to do. But offering, the apartment to someone who can move in within a week or 2 weeks, and when you put that into perspective, it's going to help you reduce that vacancy time, and it's going to protect your rental income in the long run, right? When you're thinking about what your yearly income for the rent is.
That
Um,
makes sense. I think you touched upon it earlier, right? People
yeah.
have to give either 30, in our case, a 60-day notice. And so the last thing they want to do is pay double rent. So a lot of
Mhm.
people don't want to move in until maybe 30 days later. So if you are able to get somebody to move in 2 weeks earlier, I mean, that could be thousands of dollars that you end up saving. So
Exactly.
great strategy that you have there. Now,
Yeah.
obviously, you mentioned the way to really price a property is based on the amenities of the property. What the property
Mhm.
looks like, what are its features. Now, obviously, not all properties are the same, and everybody wants a dishwasher or wants in-unit laundry and things like that, but not all of them have it. So, what are some things that a landlord could do to try to improve the marketability or how a property shows and feels, both online as well as in person?
Yeah. So and if we take it back to, turnkey and prep, right? And doing like small renovations, a lot of times people, I think the top, maybe like three or four things that renters look for is the most important thing would be like painting, right? If you haven't painted in the last 3 years or so, then it's going to look old. The paint is going to have a lot of stains. There's going to be a lot of scuff marks everywhere, especially if you had multiple tenants or if you had a long-term tenant. Painting is going to be a very important thing because you can really tell the difference between old paint and then new paint. And it's also you get that kind of like fresh paint smell that a lot of renters compliment you on is, like, oh, I could tell it's fresh, right? When you walk in through the door. So that's one big thing. The second thing I would say is I would say like new flooring. So if you have like outdated flooring, carpet, or just tiles, maybe think about updating the flooring or doing like refinishing, right? If you have a lot of scratches on the floor and it just looks really outdated, right? Maybe you want to take a look into refinishing or replacing the floors. That's going to be a huge thing as well. Um, some other small things that you could do. Well, before that, obviously we got to talk about appliance upgrades, right? If you have like those old appliances that are rusting, get get the stainless steel ones because I think everybody hates the white refrigerators,
Everybody
the
likes
white
stainless steel.
appliances. Yeah. So even if you have like like an all right average kitchen, I think the stainless steel appliances really add that or enhances the kitchen a lot. And then like the smaller upgrades, like things that not a lot of landlords think about, but they do make a difference is think about replacing outlet covers. If you have like those old yellow outlet covers or light switches, that's going to really make your property look outdated. So I guarantee you, once you replace it all throughout the unit, it looks a lot brighter and newer, right? You just want to get rid of like those old, details that will kind of indicate that the property's old and not really taken care of. Some things to do is just like focus on the other small details, like doorknobs, replace it with, like those matte black ones or new gold ones, just to give like a more refreshed feel to the place. So yeah, I think those things that I mentioned and like focusing on the small details, if you're on a budget, anything really helps in order to really showcase the property well.
Okay, that makes sense. So the big takeaway
Did that
is,
answer your question?
yeah, I think
Okay.
the big takeaway is that um, there's a lot of things you can do, but it doesn't mean it
Yeah.
has to break the bank. And so you can do some minor things if you can't afford to purchase a bunch of stainless steel appliances, and you can just do some minor cosmetic updates like changing the outlet covers, changing light fixtures, door handles, and things like that. So that makes perfect sense. And I'm sure that could be a little easier on the budget than having to redo all the flooring, for example.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, once a property looks really great and you have the right price point, you're going to have to get it onto the market. You're going to have to make it public. So,
Hmm.
what's the process with that? Do you just put it on to Craigslist, or what's the best thing for a landlord to do?
Yeah, you want to be able to maximize your digital exposure as much as you can. So we recommend like posting into various different platforms, apartment listing platforms. So we what we do is we do 18 plus. I think it's about 18 plus. We're adding new ones every now and then. But we're adding to our platforms that we publish to. But you want to make sure you get it on, of course, Zillow. Facebook Marketplace is huge now too. So we've had a lot of increase from Facebook Marketplace. And then we've actually moved in some people from Facebook Marketplace. So that's good. That's going to be a huge one. Zumper, TruliaApartments.com. Try taking a look at college pads as well, because you do have a lot of students that need housing and they're going to be on that site taking a look at what are available properties. So you don't want to shy away from that exposure. And then of course Craigslist. I think anywhere else in the US, Craigslist is kind of like a sketchy platform to use, right? But since it's based in San Francisco, a lot of San Franciscans, they want to just kind of stick to old vintage platforms or old vintage things. So Craigslist is huge here. We get about 30% of our digital exposure from Craigslist. So you want to make sure that it's listed on there as well. But I warn you, it does take a lot of work to be able to manage all of those platforms, but you just have to make sure you're checking it every day, checking your emails, to make sure that there's no leads that have not been responded to yet.
Makes sense. And you're right. I think we all love Craig. Um, best all our love to him over in the Sunset District. Now, let's put some numbers around it, and maybe not exact numbers, but maybe percentages. So, if a landlord didn't know about all those platforms, because you said 18 plus, that's a lot. Um, what if they missed out on a platform, like even a small platform? But let's just say, for instance, they didn't know about Zumper or Facebook Marketplace. When you look at a big pie out of a whole, say, 100 people that might be inquiring about a property, how many of those 100 won't ever see the property because it wasn't listed on a platform like Facebook Marketplaces?
Yeah, I think if you're, and I'm not sure about the exact metrics for all of the other apartment listing sites, but even if it's just 5% exposure, right? In that pie of 100, you could have had or found a renter from that 5%, right? You don't want to completely negate it because who knows, right? If especially if your property has been on the market for a while and you're struggling to find a renter, you want to be able to not leave any stone unturned, right? And then you want to be able to try to cast your net wide so that way you attract as much exposure as possible. And what we've seen too is that like Facebook Marketplace, we started this I think about a year and a half to 2 years ago, but man, has that made a difference. And I think it's getting up there to Craigslist in San Francisco, and I think it's about the same amount of renters that we find from Craigslist that are on Facebook Marketplace as well. But yeah, it's I think just the takeaway is just you want to be able to maximize that exposure. So as many as you can post on, the better.
And I know personally, I'm a little older, so Uh, I just used to use just a few platforms back in the day, but I know that some owners that we come across are only using Craigslist. And
Yeah.
from past experience, I know like Zumper and Zillow add in about upwards of a third of all inquiries. So if you're only doing Craigslist, you might be missing out on two-thirds of all the renters out there.
Yeah,
Now, I
exactly.
know we're starting to run out of time, and we're going to try and squeeze in as much as we can. So, uh, once once you have it out there and you have it broadcast widely for as many possible renters that are looking as possible, and it
Mhm.
looks great because you updated it or you made those cosmetic updates, you have the right price point, people are seeing it. Eventually, you're going to come across someone that wants to submit an application. So when you
Mhm.
get an application, um, and we're talking about trying to lease up as quickly as possible,
Mhm.
you're not going to be sitting on that application. You really need to start screening and vetting everything in there, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so
So,
sorry, go ahead.
no, no. So, what are the tips and tricks to try to expedite that as quickly as possible?
Yeah, so when screening applications, sometimes you might have multiple applications, right? And you want to be able to screen as quickly as possible because it's a very competitive market. Don't think that the applicant that submitted an application for your rental is only wanting to move forward with your rental, or that's the only application that they submitted, right? A lot of times people have multiple, or they send or submit multiple applications to various properties because they understand the competitive markets, right? And they want to move forward with anyone that wants to get back to them as soon as possible and that can secure a lease as soon as possible. Uh, a lot of the strategies that I've seen renters use is that they actually don't really try to secure a rental a couple months in advance anymore. A lot of people know that landlords want to move forward with renters that can move in right away. So oftentimes they're looking when they start looking is a month after their lease ends, right? And sometimes they're coming up on that time, and they need to move in next week, and it's making them very anxious that they can't receive an answer right away or within a few days. So they're going to want to move forward with the landlord that provides them an answer right away versus one that takes their time. And some strategies that you can do in order to kind of facilitate this is, giving deadlines for applications, right? Let's say, for example, let them know that if you do have multiple applications, then, you can say that, for example, you'll proceed with the application that finishes first, right? Or you give them a deadline, like please submit your applications or finish your applications, or return any necessary documents by the end of day tomorrow, or end of day the next couple of days, or it's like a set date or something, just to give a little bit of pressure, so that way you don't face applicants that kind of just hang out and they're trying to submit applications or hear from other landlords first before moving forward with you. You can really screen and filter that out and filter the applicants that really are interested in your place. What's going to happen is that, if you're sticking with that one applicant and let's say it takes a week later, you send over the lease and they're about to sign. And then they say, sorry, we're going to move forward with someone else. And then now you're behind a week because you didn't do showings, backup showings, and you didn't, you dismissed the other applicants that were in line. So definitely very important to communicate the deadlines.
What's your recommendation on turnaround time? So you get an application. How quickly do you want to
Yes.
turn it around? Do you want to turn
Uh,
around 24 hours, 48 hours?
yeah, ideally 24 hours. And right when we get an
Wow.
application, that's kind of when we start right away, taking a look at everything they've submitted. And we have like instructions for them, exactly what to submit, what references to provide. And we want to be able to, right off the bat, start working on it, make the calls, leave messages, and really try to get all the information that we can and let them know exactly what they're missing so they can work on it, right? And if you do get another application in, you definitely want to mention that to the group, like, hey, we have another application. So it's in your best interest in order to, get everything that we need back to us in order for us to,
Okay.
process it as soon as possible. But yeah,
Well,
it's
that
about, I would say,
makes sense.
24 hours, but maximum 3 days. I mean, if someone takes longer than that, then I don't think it's worth your time, right? Unless if they're the only application, right? And it kind of shows that, maybe they're not as interested in your property.
You might have
And
something
of
else
course,
lined up.
yeah, and then the application, once it gets approved, you do want to also put like a deadline around lease review and signing too, because nobody, if it's an urgent type of thing, especially in the San Francisco competitive market, nobody's going to read a lease and sign it within, they're not going to need a whole week or 2 weeks in order to review and sign the lease, right? You want to be able to put a deadline on that. So that way it puts pressure on them to get things done. So that way you can get secured on your lease and they can get secured on their lease as well. And we can move forward with the next steps.
So we're coming up on my favorite part of anything, which is regulatory and compliance, because I'm all about risk mitigation. And
Yes.
so when we talk about leases, you kept on bringing it up. That is the next step after you have an approved applicant. And
Mhm.
so when we're thinking about how do we lease up as quickly as possible, and you talk about leases, what's really important when it comes to leases, in terms of risk mitigation, in terms of adhering to regulatory and compliance requirements? What can you tell our self-managing property owners and landlords out there when it comes to getting that lease ready?
Yeah, so in terms of like regulatory compliance with leases, right? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah,
Yeah.
what should landlords be aware of? Uh, so for example, I know there might have been some changes recently, I think even this year, with security deposits. I think
Oh,
an important takeaway for making sure that you lease up as quickly as possible is that maybe you don't have to wait until you have a application submitted before you start thinking about the lease, because leases can be drafted up ahead of time, can't they?
yeah, yeah, definitely. It's, you just want to make sure that it's all prepared. And we do this like during marketing too. We prepare the lease so that way, once there's an application, then, once an application gets approved, we can send out the lease right away. But yeah, you mentioned something with the security deposits, right? So if and I think it's very important to know about the regulatory compliance that's new for this year too, that a lot of landlords may not know. And there's a few, but I think the most important one that people have heard about is like the 1 month security deposit maximum, right? So California enacted a new security deposit law that I think it took effect in July, but to sum it up, basically you cannot charge additional security deposit, even if it is so it's a 1 month maximum security deposit, right? But you can't charge beyond that. And not even for pet deposits. A lot of landlords like to put on pet deposits on top of that, like $500 or so, but you actually cannot exceed 1 month's rent, even if it is pet deposit. So pet deposit is considered the deposit overall, like holistically, right? So that's something important to know while you're drafting up the lease, because if you do charge more than that, then you're in violation of that new law. And when running an application too, there's another regulation that came out. It was SB 267, I believe. But it's basically when you're running an application and you want to also advertise this or at least voice it out to applicants ahead of time, is that basically the law is that it prohibits landlords from denying rental applications based on credit history if the applicant is receiving government assistance. So like Section 8 or like any other rental housing subsidies, right? So now you can't deny an application that has a low credit score if they're on one of those programs. So really important thing to know about the screening process moving forward. And then there's another one too for empty homes tax. But Lawrence, you did a video on this recently that
I
I think a lot of
did.
people want to see. But you want to sum that up for us real quick?
Well, empty homes tax is something that's new this year.
Yeah.
It started in January, and so if you have your home empty for a certain number of days, then you could be subject to an empty homes tax. And it doesn't apply to everybody. There are exemptions. Essentially, anything, I believe it's 3 units and above, it's applicable. Anything lower, it's not. And so the thing is, if you are subject to it, you will have to pay it in 2025 is when they start issuing the invoices or bills for it. But I know we're getting to the question and answer section of the webinar as we start to wrap things up, but I think the big takeaway that Nathan might have around legal compliance, around just getting a lease up as quickly as possible is that be prepared. Know your stuff. If you have to learn it early, or reach out to KeyOpp or somebody else to understand all the regulatory requirements and um, regulations that are out there, because you don't want to have to try and figure it out later when you have to get the lease prepared, or you don't want to try and figure out later when you're starting to review the application. You want to know ahead of time. That way, you're able to execute very, very quickly through each step of the leasing process. And do your homework, get things ready ahead of time. That way, you can streamline and expedite that lease up as quickly as possible.
Yeah,
Okay.
and we actually didn't touch up on a lot of the topics out there. So if you guys have, any questions, on how to lease the property faster too, definitely feel free to reach out to us. We, like I said, scan that QR code or send us an email, and we'd be more than happy to answer any of your questions on a one-on-one meeting. And I think we have
We
one question. So let's see here. So
have
what
3 questions, or maybe even
oh, good
4.
question.
So
Okay. You want to read
I'm
them?
gonna make you answer them. I'm not gonna answer them. So, what should landlords do if a tenant wants to vacate earlier than their lease end date? Essentially, I think what somebody's asking is, what happens if my tenant wants to break a lease? Do I have to
Yeah.
let them? How does that affect my ability to lease things up faster?
Yeah, so I mean, there's going to be situations, life situations that happen where a tenant does need to move out if they got laid off or if there's like a family emergency in a different city or state. So you want to keep that in mind as well. So um, you should try to be open if possible to that situation, but also understand that there is a contract, right? That is the lease, and basically, if they're ending the lease early, that is a breach of their contract. Some of the good practices that we've implemented is that we do allow for that to happen because we understand, we empathize with these types of situations, but we communicate to them that it is a contract, but it's not going to be like us just kind of mutually letting go of the contract early, right? They're more than welcome to leave the lease early, and we'll go in and then do marketing and try to lease up the property for them as soon as possible. But they are responsible for rent until we find the new applicant, or the new tenant as a replacement. And they are also responsible for the leasing fee as well. So that way the landlords are not responsible for that, because they upheld their part of the contract. It's just the tenant that needs to unilaterally cancel the contract. So that we do, work around that, but we communicate out to them what their responsibilities are. But yeah, we haven't had any issues. I mean, people, they understand, and in this case, they're really happy to let us do showings as many times as possible. So it's easier for us to go and do showings and find a replacement tenant. Sometimes it might work better in your favor if they're need let's say, for example, the lease starts in December and they're moving out 6 months later, and then you're in the summertime and you're like, sure, why not? Let's find a new tenant during this peak season. So yeah, we're definitely open to it for sure.
Okay. I'm going to add in a couple things on this question, just so people have a comprehensive idea. You can't force somebody to live in your property, even though they're contractually obligated. Like Nathan said, they are still financially liable, right? If they leave, if they want to leave, they're going to leave. Was what it comes down to. So just understand that and try to make the best of it, which is try to find somebody to move in as quickly as possible. Now, keep in mind that there are valid reasons to break a lease. And so, in those situations that are valid, you can't force a resident to pay the rent, continue to pay the rent, or you can't force them to pay any like leasing fees or anything like that, because those are reasons that the state protects, or the government protects it from. And so good examples are somebody that is on military leave. So, and we've had a lot of these situations. So you have somebody that is getting called up for duty. They are allowed to break a lease. If you have somebody that is relocating 50 miles away for work, that is a valid reason to break a lease. If you have somebody that is a victim of domestic abuse and they're trying to leave, they are allowed to break lease. So those are some of the things. So definitely make sure that you understand the laws that are out there, getting back to regulatory and compliance, right? Make sure you have a lawyer you can speak to or a property manager that you can consult, okay? Another question is, what's your advice for landlords that don't live locally or have time to manage their rentals?
Yeah, and in that case, it really boils down to having people that you trust um, help you manage your property. And the biggest thing with out of state or out of city landlords is that they're not able to be there, and they're not able to walk through the property, see what's wrong. So it's all about having trusted professionals, including vendors that you trust. And then in this case, a lot of landlords, they hire a property manager in order to manage the property because it's someone that they can trust to take care of their place. And we have a lot of clients that are out of state or out of the city, and they trust us to manage their property throughout the year.
Okay. There's another question. Um, as a property management company, how have you dealt with properties that sit for a long time despite the owner having done all the things that Nathan suggested, pricing, remodel, etc.? Um, I think, do you want to answer that, Nathan?
Yeah, it's so the biggest factor in this is the pricing. You really want to make sure because it's the pricing and then also the season as well, right? If you're posting the property in the slow season, it's just expect for it to be on the market for a little bit. But during this season or even the hot seasons, uh, it just depends on the pricing. So you want to make sure that's why it's important to do the correct market analysis in the beginning. So that way you have a really stellar first week and you can gather a lot of interest for the property. If everything else fails and that doesn't work, you can try offering concessions as well. What we've done in the past is offer, 1 month free or 2 weeks free if they're able to move in within a certain date. And then we actually post that on the rental cover photo. So that way it's in your face and you can't really miss it by, sometimes people don't like to take a look at the description. So we we utilize all these things in order to make the property rent faster. You definitely want to follow up with people. So if you've done like price adjustments, price reductions, definitely have all your leads in one place where you can contact and call them to let them know like, hey, we've reduced the price or we're offering this concession. So that way they're informed about it. And you always, a really good practice to do to avoid a sitting property too is always follow up with your leads after every showing because you want to get an idea of like, if they don't move forward with the property, you want to understand why, right? You want to collect that feedback. So that way you can think about making changes to, your property or, changes to the price or marketing, whatever it is, right? You always want to collect that feedback. So that way you know exactly, where your property sits on the competitiveness level.
Yeah, I think everything you said is right. I think at the end of the day, price drives everything. It's whether it's on the property management side, leasing side, or the sales side. Um,
Yeah.
the the demand or in this case, the renter, or in the case of sales, the buyer, they dictate what the price is, right? And
Yeah.
so they're the ones that ultimately are going to be renting or buying a property. And if a property is priced too high, doesn't matter how nice it is, you're not going to have somebody that's going to rent it. Now, all that being said, while you can't influence um, to a certain extent whether somebody's going to be able to afford to be able to rent a particular property at a particular price, you can influence the demand, right? You can make the property look better.
Mhm.
You can make, obviously, the biggest lever you have is price, right? If you if you lower the price, you're going to get more interest. It's always going to be the case. But if you want to try to meet a minimum price point, then you have to look into, like you were saying, concessions, or you have to look into doing those updates and things like that. Um, I think concessions ends up being one of those um, negotiable aspects of leasing. It's something that happened quite a bit in the pandemic time, where people didn't have to move. People didn't want to move, but they were looking to see what was out there, and if it was attractive enough and you're willing to offer a certain incentive, then they were willing to move. And so
Mhm.
that is a lever that Nathan just brought up that can work as well. Um, I I think at the end of the day, for certain types of properties, regardless of whether you change the price or however good it looks, sometimes you just have to, it does take time. And those tend to be properties that are more unique, right? I think when you look at the demographic that's out there, the most common property that rents the fastest, I should say the property type that rents the fastest is the property type that is the most common, the most highest demand. And that is always going to be either a one bedroom or two bedroom. And the reason for that is because there's more people looking for those type of properties, right? For a one bedroom or two bedroom, you have single person, you have a couple, you have even a small family in certain cases that are looking at those properties. As you get larger, 3, 4, 5 bedrooms, it does take longer just because there's fewer people out there that are looking for those properties. And so,
Yeah.
fortunately, it does take some time, but there are certain things that you can do. And concessions definitely is one of them, and doing improvements, all the things that Nathan talked about earlier.
And exactly what, with in the future, right? If we're with what we're trying to do in order to reduce the vacancy time with everything that I mentioned before, um, the first time you're trying to rent the property is going to be the hardest because of course it's going to be vacant and you have to do renovations and everything, and it might take some time, right? That's where the 60-day really comes in handy, is so you can be able to, post the property and do showings and try to find renters. And even in the slow seasons, you might be able to get find a renter within 2 months or so, but that fits within the 60-day time frame. So definitely think about including that in the lease agreements early on proactively, so that way you're setting yourself up for success in the future.
There is one last question that we received, and it's getting back to what you were talking about earlier, Nathan, around scheduling showings when it's tenant occupied. Can a landlord negotiate with tenants about showing schedules, or is that entirely tenant driven? And I think you mentioned that landlords do have a right to show a property, right? It's one of those rights for entering the premises, as long as you have a 24-hour
Definitely.
notice. But obviously,
Yeah.
honey attracts flies better than vinegar, right? So, with that in mind, what do you think is a better approach instead of using a stick? What are the carrots that you have found very successful when trying to do showings with a tenant occupied property?
Yeah, sometimes sometimes understandably they might give you a pushback, right? On they might make some excuses or just saying absolutely not. But you want to remind them, right, what the rights are that you have as a landlord, but respectfully, right? Just to inform you that, under California landlord rights, that we have a right to entry to show prospective tenants. So that's why we're trying to accommodate the showing times for you by showing on set numbers of days. And if they're pushing back even more, try reducing the number of days that you're touring to maybe one or so, right? So just pack all your showings during that one time, 1 hour block on that one day per week, and just make the most out of it. But you have to also think about what the showing experience is going to be like. If they're pushing back and they just don't want you there, and they're going to make the showing process just super uncomfortable for you and the resident, then it might not be worth your time, because if you're doing a showing and they're uncomfortable, most likely we talk about the showing experience, right? We want to make sure that's conducive to a good showing experience. And that's not going to be the case if you have a combative tenant, or a tenant that doesn't want you there at all or doesn't care about what the rights are. You have to put that into perspective as well, because you're going to be doing that time. You're going to be spending time and effort doing showings for that property, but if it's not a good showing experience, most likely they're not going to move forward with the property.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So
So,
yeah,
I think the good takeaway is um, no matter what, if you feel like you're going to have to negotiate, maybe not show the property, because better to show it after the resident leaves and that person that might be interested actually still wants to see it, versus you try to show it and they have a terrible experience and then they're just not going to submit application later. So that
exactly.
definitely.
Exactly.
Okay. As we wrap things up, and I know we're already 10 minutes over, do you want to share a little bit about KeyOpp services around leasing or management, and what promotions are we offering?
Yeah, definitely. So with the leasing services, it's everything that we covered in this video. So we actually take care of the leasing process from A to Z. So everything I mentioned in the video, and then we do uh, turnkey project management for renovations, application screening, and lease drafting, doing showings, of course, and then we onboard the residents as well. So we actually we do that's included in the property management services, which you're seeing now. So it's everything about leasing. We do property maintenance, rent collection, owner resident portals. We'll handle your finance and accounting for your properties. We do coordination with the eviction process, and then property value evaluations as well, and then satisfaction guarantee. So we actually don't do a yearly property management contract as other property managers do. We actually do a month-to-month property management contract. So it gives you the flexibility, in the case that you don't need property management services. And of course, we're very confident in our level of service that we provide for our clients. So we don't need a year contract in order to lock that down. And then we are offering a special promotion as well up until the end of October. So if you sign up with us now, then you're able, or now or until the end of October, you're able to receive 1 month free of property management fees. So your first month will be on us. And then the property management service fee would be, the subsequent month afterwards. We also reduced our leasing fee as well for those that are, self-managed landlords, but don't have the time in order to do showings or take care of, the tenant placement part of management. So our leasing fee is at 80% of the rent price from the standard 1 month's rent that a lot of property managers and other realtors are charging for leasing fees. But yeah, those are some special promotions that we're running right now. So definitely reach out to us if you're interested in that, and then we'll walk you through the process for onboarding.
Awesome. Well, Nathan, thank you so much for answering all those questions about leasing your, how to expedite and quickly lease up your properties. And thank you to everybody that joined our webinar, and look forward to our future webinar series, which will be shared through our social media channels as well as on our website. Until next time, take care, and we'll see you guys soon.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.